Are you ready to find out what happens when the legal system fails, and a father is forced to engineer his own version of divine intervention? This isn't just a story of survival, it's a masterclass in psychological warfare. When billionaire real estate mogul Richard Vance leveraged his wealth to erase a fatal hit and run, he thought a quiet payoff could bury the truth forever. He had no idea that the grieving high school teacher he left in the wreckage was a former military intelligence analyst. For 3 long years, Arthur Pendleton played the part of a broken, forgotten man. But behind closed doors, he was orchestrating a massive, multi-layered financial and personal trap that would strip Vance of his company, his family, and his freedom in less than 24 hours. Get ready for a slow-burning, intensely dramatic psychological thriller about the terrifying power of absolute patience and cold, calculated justice. The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the glowing neon skyline of Manhattan. Up on the 40th floor of the Vance Tower, the air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and old money. Richard Vance, the billionaire real estate tycoon whose name was plastered across half the skyscrapers in the city, leaned back in his leather executive chair. He was looking at a man sitting across from him, a man wearing a slightly faded suit, holding a worn-out briefcase. That man was me. My name is Arthur Pendleton. For the past 3 years, the world knew me as a quiet, broken-hearted high school history teacher. But before that, I spent a decade as a strategic intelligence analyst. Richard Vance smirked, tapping his gold pen against a pristine, silver-plated desk organizer. Arthur, let's be entirely realistic here, Vance said, his voice dripping with an arrogant sort of pity. The legal system has already spoken. The grand jury declined to indict. The police report clearly states it was an unavoidable accident on a dark, wet road. I am genuinely sorry about your daughter. Truly, I am. But coming to my office and begging for an admission of guilt is getting pathetic. You have exactly 5 minutes to leave before security escorts you out of the building. Permanently. I didn't blink. I didn't let a single muscle in my face move. I just looked at him, absorbing the absolute certainty in his eyes. He thought his money had bought him permanent immunity. He thought the $2 million he spent on high-priced defense attorneys, falsified toxicology reports, and a strategically paid-off precinct captain had erased the night his luxury sports car crossed the yellow line and stole my 8-year-old Lily's life. I understand, Mr. Vance, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I stood up, adjusting my faded jacket, and calmly picked up my briefcase. Good man, Vance said, not even looking up as he pulled open a fresh folder. Go home, Arthur. Find a hobby. Let it go. As the heavy mahogany doors of his office clicked shut behind me, the submissive, defeated posture I had maintained for 3 years instantly vanished. I stood tall in the executive elevator, looking at my reflection in the polished mirror. Vance thought today was a desperate confrontation. He had no idea it was the final, critical calibration of a trap that had taken me exactly 42 months to build. You see, when a man like Richard Vance destroys your entire universe, you don't fight him in a broken court system where his checkbook dictates the verdict. You don't throw a rock at a tank. You wait until the commander steps out of the tank to gloat, and then you steal the keys. Instead of going back to my modest apartment, I drove 40 minutes out to an industrial park in New Jersey. I unlocked a heavy metal door to a windowless warehouse. Inside, there were no tools or machinery. The walls were lined with whiteboards, detailed organizational charts, financial ledgers, and dozens of high-definition monitors. This was my command center. For nearly 4 years, I had quietly used my intelligence background to map out every single node of Richard Vance's life. I knew his shell companies in the Cayman Islands. I knew the specific municipal judges he routinely bribed for zoning permits. I knew his wife, Evelyn, was secretly funneling corporate funds into a private account to prepare for a high-stakes divorce. And most importantly, I knew about Project Horizon, the massive, multi-billion-dollar commercial development project Vance was finalizing with a consortium of sovereign wealth funds from Europe. Vance had leveraged every single asset he owned to finance Project Horizon. He had used his current real estate portfolio as collateral for a massive $900 million bridge loan from a global banking syndicate. If that project succeeded, he would become untouchable. If it failed, his entire empire would collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. I sat down at my central terminal, the blue light of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. I pulled up the encrypted digital network of Vance Global Holdings. Vance thought I was just a grieving teacher, but he forgot that 3 years ago, when his insurance adjusters and lawyers forced me to sign a civil liability waiver in exchange for a meager funeral payout, I had personally walked into his corporate headquarters to deliver the signed papers. While his arrogant legal team was laughing in the conference room, I had politely asked to use the restroom. On my way back, I passed the main server room and discreetly dropped a highly sophisticated, military-grade hardware keylogger into a secondary network switch. For 1,000 days, I had been a ghost in his machine. I possessed every password, every confidential email, every offshore wire routing number, and every recorded conversation between Vance and his corrupt inner circle. Time to pull the thread, I murmured to the empty room. I opened a secure, heavily encrypted communication portal and sent a massive, 40-gigabyte data file to 3 distinct entities simultaneously: the Southern District of New York's Federal Prosecutors, the Internal Revenue Service's Criminal Investigation Division, and the Compliance Board of the European Banking Syndicate funding Project Horizon. The file didn't contain emotional pleas or rants about my daughter. It contained pure, undeniable, structured evidence. It held unredacted bank statements proving that Vance Global Holdings had forged construction safety certifications, laundered money through dummy construction firms, and directly funneled $12 million in cash to corrupt city officials to secure the land for Project Horizon. But I wasn't just relying on the government. The wheels of federal justice can turn slowly, and I required an immediate, absolute execution of my plan. At 7:45 a.m. the next morning, I arrived at a high-end, discreet coffee shop in Manhattan's financial district. A few minutes later, an elegantly dressed woman in her late 40s walked in. She wore a tailored cream coat and dark sunglasses. It was Evelyn Vance, Richard's wife. She looked startled when I stood up from a corner booth and politely pulled out a chair for her. "Mr. Pendleton," she asked, her voice tense, glancing around nervously. "Your text message said you had urgent information regarding my husband's offshore accounts. How did you get my private number?" "That doesn't matter, Evelyn," I said, sliding a thick manila envelope across the table. "What matters is what's inside that folder." She hesitantly opened it. Her breath hitched. Inside were detailed financial statements from a private bank in Zurich, Switzerland. The account was under the name of a 24-year-old runway model, Richard's secret mistress. But more importantly, the documents proved that Richard had recently altered his estate planning and corporate bylaws. He had quietly structured Project Horizon so that in the event of a divorce, 95% of his assets would be legally shielded in an untraceable domestic asset protection trust, leaving Evelyn with virtually nothing but a fraction of their mortgaged properties. Evelyn's face turned completely pale. The shock quickly hardened into a cold, venomous rage. He told me these trusts were for our children's inheritance," she whispered, her hands trembling. "He lied to you, just like he lies to the world," I said calmly. "He is planning to file for divorce the moment the European funds clear next week. If you want to protect yourself and your children, you need to file a specialized ex parte emergency injunction in family court within the next 2 hours. Freeze every single domestic asset, corporate bank account, and voting share tied to his name before he realizes what's happening. My attorneys have already drafted the paperwork for you. All your lawyer needs to do is sign and submit it." She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and immense gratitude. "Why are you doing this for me?" I looked her dead in the eyes. "Because your husband thinks he can destroy lives without ever paying the price. Today, the bill is due." She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the folder, stood up, and walked out of the coffee shop, dialing her attorney before she even reached the sidewalk. By 10:15 a.m., I was parked directly across the street from the Vance Tower. I had a police scanner running on my dashboard, and I was monitoring the live internal security feeds of the building via my laptop. The dominoes were falling perfectly. First came the family court order. Because of the undeniable evidence of asset dissipation Evelyn's lawyers provided, a federal judge signed an emergency freeze order. Suddenly, all of Richard Vance's primary corporate operating accounts were locked. Inside the executive suite, panic erupted. My screen showed Vance's chief financial officer bursting into his office, sweating profusely, waving a stack of papers. Through the hidden audio feed, I heard the CFO's frantic voice, "Richard. The bank just cut off our short-term credit facility. We can't wire the earnest money for the downtown plaza acquisition. The system says our corporate treasury is completely frozen due to a marital dispute order filed by Evelyn." Vance slammed his fists onto his desk, standing up so fast his chair flew backward. "What? Call our asset attorneys. Evelyn doesn't have the leverage to freeze corporate accounts. Get them on the phone right now." "I can't," the CFO yelled back, his voice cracking. "And it gets worse. Much worse. The European Syndicate for Project Horizon just sent an official legal notice. They've completely pulled out of the development deal. They cite a material breach of the morality and compliance clauses. Richard, someone leaked our internal zoning ledgers. The federal authorities have opened a criminal racketeering investigation into Vance Global." Vance stumbled backward, his face draining of all color. The untouchable billionaire suddenly looked like a trapped animal. "Who leaked it? Find out who did this. It had to be someone inside this building." Right at that exact moment, the elevators on the 40th floor opened. 6 federal agents in dark blue jackets with IRS criminal investigation stamped across the back stepped out, accompanied by 4 armed FBI agents. They bypassed the frantic receptionist and marched directly into Richard Vance's office. "Richard Vance," the lead agent announced, pulling a federal warrant from his pocket. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Step away from the desk and place your hands behind your back." Through the camera feed, I watched Vance stammer, trying to summon his usual arrogant authority. "Do you know who I am? Call my attorney. You can't just walk into my office." An FBI agent efficiently grabbed Vance's wrists, pulled them behind his back, and clicked a heavy pair of steel handcuffs into place. The entire open-floor office of Vance Global Holdings went dead silent as their billionaire founder was marched out in front of hundreds of his employees, his head forced down, his expensive suit rumpled. I closed my laptop. I took a deep, steady breath, feeling a profound, quiet weight lift off my chest for the first time in 3 long years. I got out of my car and walked into the lobby of the Vance Tower. The building was in utter chaos. Employees were crying, security guards were whispering frantically, and the phones at the reception desk were ringing off the hook. Nobody paid any attention to a quiet high school teacher walking through the crowd. I walked over to the elevator banks and waited. A few moments later, the doors of the executive elevator opened. 2 federal agents were escorting Richard Vance out toward the transport vehicles waiting on the street. As they led him through the lobby, our eyes met. Vance stopped dead in his tracks. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a sudden, horrifying realization. In that single, fleeting second, he connected all the dots. The quiet teacher who had begged for justice in his office yesterday wasn't begging at all. He was checking the target. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply raised my hand and gave him a slow, calm nod. Vance opened his mouth to scream something at me, but a federal agent forcefully nudged him forward. "Keep moving, Mr. Vance," the agent commanded, pushing him through the revolving glass doors and out into the pouring rain. I stood in the lobby, watching the police cruisers speed away, their sirens echoing through the concrete canyons of New York City. The man who thought his wealth made him a god was on his way to a sterile holding cell. His company was ruined, his fortune was frozen, and his legacy was permanently erased. I walked out of the building, pulled my collar up against the cold wind, and looked up at the gray sky. "It's over, Lily," I whispered into the rain. Justice finally found him.